Susanne Siebentritt, who joins us for the discussion, co-coordinates the study, and both of us are speaking on behalf of our interdisciplinary consortium we see here, which includes colleagues from physics, economics, logistics and supply chain management, from water engineering and water management, and from energy studies, just to sum up. Helena Freitag wanted to show this graph. Now I have the opportunity to introduce it to you, and you probably saw it in the media hardly 2 weeks ago when once again the Stockholm Resilience Center drastically showed to what extent we are exceeding the so-called planetary boundaries in 6 out of 9 sectors illustrated here. So we see a massive impact on the environment by human activity. What we see to a lower extent, or only implicitly in this picture, is that all those detrimental effects on nature can have detrimental impacts on the economy itself. So I very much subscribe to the pledge we heard earlier to see the economy as an inherent part of the planetary ecosystem and our societies with it, and not to make a distinction between the economy here and nature there. So it's about those systemic effects and the physical risks resulting of these damages, if I call it this way, that we are interested in. Physical threats resulting from climate change, for example, where extreme weather events cause flash floods, which can be detrimental to physical infrastructures, production sites, and even human lives. Biodiversity loss like spruce dieback, very present here in Luxembourg, just as a very visible outcome of biodiversity loss and ecological impacts. Or resource scarcity, which is not only bound to the physical scarcity and availability of resources, globally speaking, but can also have a technical dimension when, for example, navigable rivers suffer from low water levels, and by that, international supply chains are cut for certain periods of time. It's those 3 main threats, climate change, resource scarcity, and biodiversity loss, we focused at in our study. By subdividing them further, for example, climate change in the more chronic evolutions like continuously rising temperature levels, or the more acute heavy rain events, for example. Resource scarcity can be both physical scarcity in the sense of availability, ultimate availability of resources, but can also be economic availability in the sense of affordability. Think about the current energy price situation, for example. And biodiversity loss can be both the decline of species, animal and plants, but also to other forms of deterioration and changes, for example, new species invading our ecosystems or other types of degradation. In our study in Luxembourg, we focused on sectors that are relevant for the national economy: industrial manufacturing, the construction sector mentioned earlier today, wood and forestry, and food processing. And we also looked at so-called supportive industries in the energy sector and in the realm of transportation, storage, and logistics. This is a selective view for practical reasons. I get back to those limitations of our study later on. Now the presentation seems to be stuck. Sorry for that.
Is it possible to move on the presentation?
Now it goes on. Thank you. So just quickly, we were interested in identifying the most pertinent risks, physical risks for Luxembourg. In addition to that, we tried to find out how aware is Luxembourg's economy of those risks. And from that, we want to identify fields of action and give policy recommendations. This is still work in progress, and the results I'm going to present today can only be preliminary for this third part. Please skip to the next slide,
yes.
As the remote doesn't work. Can somebody push a button? I cannot push from here.
Can one of the
There-
technicians
there it is,
please
there it is.
advance the
Okay, there it
presentation?
is. Yeah. We did this not on our own. We did this with the help of many people, some of them present in this room. Thank you again for your commitment and the various formats we organized over the last 1.5 years. So building on the literature, international literature, country reports and the like, we identified the supposedly most relevant risks and then tried to adapt our approach to the national context based on existing studies for Luxembourg, but also based on information, first-hand information we get from actors, practitioners in the country. Then focusing those risks, we, with the help of interviews and the survey, we got a better appreciation of how certain actors in companies, in municipal and national administrations assess those risks and what they mean for Luxembourg, more concretely speaking, and we try to validate those results in a kind of reflective workshop shortly before the summer break. What's usually done in this kind of risk assessments is that one brings together the probability of a certain threat, how often does something occur, with the impact, the potential impact, the severity. So a Fukushima event being not very likely, low probability, but with an immense impact, obviously, it would figure in the upper left corner of this graph. What we did in addition to this conventional approach is that we looked at the actual awareness amongst Luxembourg's companies. To what extent do they anticipate these kind of threats hitting their firms in the not too remote future? So the lower the awareness level, the limited put in red here, the higher the impact of this particular factor is. So high severity, high probability, and the lack of awareness is the most unfortunate combination of all three factors you can find. I know you're getting tired of seeing bar charts. I only present three and rather quickly. In those bar charts, for each and every sub-threat we identified, we accumulated those three factors, probability, severity or impact, and the actual awareness. And what's striking is that even quite frequent and recently rather frequent events such as flash floods seem to be underrated, at least by the people we talked to and the people that responded to our survey. They can be, as we know, very detrimental to certain infrastructures and to human life, and should probably, in terms of policy actions, should probably be given priority. I come back to this in a moment. I think it's a battery issue of that.
A battery issue, yeah.
Remote control, if somebody could help me.
It's okay.
More surprisingly, flash floods, they are in the media, they are also well documented, and they're even anticipated by this kind of scenario maps you find on the GeoPortal, a very excellent tool to see for the industrial zone du Lange-Bertambourg, for example, to what extent sea surfaces, transport infrastructure, storage buildings, and the like are exposed to flash flood risks. In terms of resources, resource availability or scarcity, freshwater ranks highest in our score, again due to the fact that there's little awareness of something rather relevant for Luxembourg, not in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, but right now. If you look at the map to the left where you see those groundwater basins in Luxembourg polluted by nitrate, and for that no longer explored for drinking water, or to the right, the low water level of the Stausee in 2018, so reservoirs for drinking water, for fresh water supply, very much in danger. And the final dimension, biodiversity, and here I take the example of water ecosystem damages that are more indirectly affecting nature and biodiversity. Again, spruce dieback in many of Luxembourg's forests to being the most spectacular example. I take this example to underline that none of the threats presented here can be looked at in an isolated manner. They're all interconnected, they're all mutually interdependent, and there are a lot of feedback loops in between, and maybe the water system example is the most illustrative one to grasp. Some preliminary conclusions. We see an obvious mismatch between the risk level as we find it in the literature and preceding studies on Luxembourg and the actual awareness amongst economic actors in Luxembourg. Many of the responses we received were very much overshadowed and kind of biased by the Ukraine war and the so-called energy crisis resulting thereof, and also by the labor market situation. We heard about this in de Margerie's presentation earlier, and depending on where the transition of Luxembourg's economy goes, this will become an even more severe aspect. Biodiversity risks in general seem to be underrated, if not completely overlooked, maybe due to the fact that most of them are rather indirect compared to storm events or flash floods or non-availability of a mineral resource. They are probably more to be seen in the long run, but we heard in Elena Freiter's presentation how central and crucial they are for the functioning of our societies. And what we also heard, maybe surprisingly, in our survey is a certain demand for more regulation, for more, also a claim for state subsidies and financial help, but in particular for regulation and clarity in terms of future standards, future norms, when it comes to certain ways of producing or transporting things. The recommendations, and this is very much work in progress, as I said earlier, could start with awareness-raising measures to try to bridge this gap between the actual risk and the awareness. Ideally, of course, one would target the origins of those threats, which is not a trivial endeavor, in particular when it comes to global environmental and climate change. More locally and more hands-on, one could start with self-assessment tools for companies to ask themselves where they are most vulnerable in their everyday production and work, and a comprehensive mapping of the logistics and network infrastructure, including energy networks, water supply networks, and the like in Luxembourg, could help us obtain evidence for action and resilience building. In the long run, increase the adaptive capacity of the economy seems to be an important requirement, and maybe this could be reached to certain sorts of diversification, for example, when it comes to becoming more independent of international supply chains, let's say in the construction sector or other manufacturing sectors. Limitations to our study are obvious. We started from a rather small sample. We should look into other industries, and we should ask for the actual vulnerability of firms and more precisely ask how prepared the firms are. This we can't draw from our data, and this could be a next step in a preceding study. The report of the study, accompanied by a short summarizing video, will be available soon this autumn under the link listed here. I thank you for your attention.